All right, let's do it. So thank you, everybody, and welcome to this first Cobargo and District Energy Transition Group community consultation on the Cobargo microgrid. My name is Zena Armstrong. I'm the president of Cadets, and it's a great pleasure to be able to organise, have you all here to ask questions, to engage, and to help us shape this amazing project that we have been funded for by the federal government. So I'd just like, in the first instance, to, I guess, kind of touch on why we're all here and why we're doing this. Matt, I can only see this first slide. Can you put me up so I can see who I'm talking to? Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Good to see everybody. As everybody in Cobargo in this local region will remember, we all went through the impacts of the loss of power after the bushfire went through here in 2019. And we were one of many communities on the South Coast who suffered the prolonged impacts of this loss of power as a result of the poles and wires all along this coast burning in these bushfires. Many issues flowed from that, including the impact on our sewage, the impact on our water, the fact that we couldn't get money out of the bank, the fact that medicines and food were all destroyed as a result of not having power for fridges and things. I think we all remember what it was like. And we do have a couple of speakers who will talk about their very direct experiences later on in this presentation. This experience prompted a group of local residents to come together to see what might be able to be done to address this lack of energy resilience. And this project has come out of that work and those discussions. Many of you who are on this link might remember that in the early days after the fires, Deb Summer and Dave Newell coordinated a number of community meetings, and energy security was one of the themes that came out of that meeting. And this group of residents has come together to look at what we might do as a community to address this risk. Really pleased to see everybody here, and I'm looking forward to a really robust discussion about this project. We welcome your questions, whatever they might be, warts and all. We've got a panel of people here ready to take us through the project and to answer questions. Now, I have to apologise in advance that if there are any glitches, we have practiced this presentation and this consultation, but two of our key people on the community consultation team have come down with COVID, and at the very last minute, while they were hoping that they would be able to steer us through this consultation, they have had to pull out because COVID's taken them quite badly. So we picked it up this morning, and we're going to do what we can to make sure this is a glitch-free presentation. And hopefully this will be the last one that we have to do on Zoom, that from now on, any further consultations, and we are planning quite a number, will be conducted face-to-face now that the restrictions are lifted. So we apologise that this is on Zoom. We understand that Zoom is a bit difficult for some people who don't have access to a good internet connection, but hopefully from here on in we'll be able to do face-to-face ones. Now, this project and this meeting is taking place on Yuin country, and I would like to welcome Rodney Kelly to give the welcome to country. Thank you, Rodney.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, I'm Rodney Kelly. I'm local Juranganj Yuin man. I just want to start by acknowledging the local Juranganj people of the Yuin Nation. And pay respects to the elders, past and present. And I just want to say, you know, Cobargo is a very special and cultural area. To the north, we have Gulaga Mountain, where the women would have their ceremonies. To the south, we have Bayamanga, Mumbala Mountain, where the men would have their ceremonies. And, you know, we've got Cobargo in between. Out west of Cobargo is a big tool making site, tool making area. So, you know, there have been various tools found in Cobargo area. And west of Cobargo, you know, there is a river out there with carvings from where axe heads have been made for thousands of years. You know, so Cobargo and the surrounds, you know, is a very special and spiritual place for Aboriginal people, for the Jurunganj people of the Yuin Nation. So, yeah, I just want to pay respects to the elders and you know, acknowledge how sacred you know, the Cobargo area really is. And welcome you all to the meeting to speak about, you know, this very sacred and spiritual part of Australia. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rodney. And I think we all share a lot of that feeling about the sacredness of this place. I'd like to now introduce Luke Jewell, who's going to be our host for this meeting and take us through how the consultation is going to proceed. Luke, over to you.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Rodney. Yeah, look, welcome everybody, and thank you for taking your hard-earned spare time out to attend this community consultation. We're going to keep this simple today, and as explained, our very capable hosts are both ill, and so you'll have to put up with me. But we're going to today, first of all, if you just see up on the screen there, just a bit of housekeeping on how you can best participate in today's meeting. So in Zoom, there's a Q&A feature. And so if you look down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see, as per the diagram there, a Q&A icon that you can click on, and then you can start typing in where it says type your question here. Emphasis on the fact that you can keep doing that all the way through. You can also click on the chat icon and type whatever you like in there. And if you want to respond in a nice positive way to someone else's chat, go for it. This is not a locked up consultation. This is open for you, and it's your opportunity to ask questions. Now, another thing I'll emphasize now is this session is being recorded. So if you do have any problem with that, or feel like you'd rather not be recorded as a participant, please feel free to leave now, and your questions can be answered later on via other means. But yeah, just to let you know, this will be recorded. So if you do need to leave before the end of the session and you'd like to come back and review it, you'll be able to see the recording, which will be sent to you via a link by our wonderful IT team here today. The other thing you can do is go onto our website. So there's a lovely website set up called renewablecobargo.com. And so you'll be able to visit that site and provide feedback directly through there as well. And there will be an email address there too, I believe, where you'll be able to send emailed questions or feedback. So I think that just about covers the, in terms of how to participate. In terms of the meeting outline and what we're going to cover quickly today, we will have a quick introduction to Cadet by Zena, if she's got more to add than what she's already shared with us. We're going to have a couple of community members share their experiences during the power outages during the fires. And then we're going to hand over to ITP Renewables and their team. And so they're the group that have been contracted and via federal government funding to deliver the highly technical and engineering aspects of this project. And thankfully, that's not up to us on the committee to do, or for you to do as a community member. We've got some really capable professionals to do that. And then finally, we'll finish up with a Q&A session, which will be roughly half an hour. That's what we're shooting for, where we can really get into it. So if you can hold your comments and questions in terms of anything verbal to that last session, that would be great, just out of respect for the speakers who are putting in the hard work of presenting. That'd be wonderful. Thank you so much. So I think that's about it in terms of what we're going to be doing today. I'd like to hand back to you now, Zena. Thank you.
Okay, just very quickly, cadet, this is the cadet team. So this is the committee, and you might see a few familiar faces on there that you recognise, some from the Cobargo village itself. We've also drawn in some expertise from Bermagui. Bill Southwood's had a long involvement with Clean Energy Fraternity, and he's been very helpful in sort of steering and shaping some of our thinking, which has been terrific. We've got a range of skills on board. Alex and Matt, who I think bring down the average age by at least 25 years, are both electrical engineers. Alex has got a background in renewable batteries. We've got people who've got asset management skills. We've got people from the farming community, and people who've got a great deal of experience in community consultation. People have come together through the community discussions that were held after the fires, as I mentioned, and many people put their names down to keep in touch about energy security issues as they developed, and have stepped up as members of the committee. There is room for more people to become part of Cadet. Other people saw articles and asked how they might become involved. We can take all comers. So if any of you out there are really keen in becoming involved and helping us, we've got a lot of work to do over the next couple of years, and it would be great to have more engagement, particularly from Cobargo, Cobargo and district residents. You're all welcome. We are an incorporated association. We incorporated last year, and we have applied for quite a number of funding grants, which we've been successful in half. So that includes this one. We also have another grant that we won through the Black Summer funding, which is Commonwealth Government, to build cool refuges and what we've called resilient energy hubs at 4 buildings in Cobargo, which include the School of Arts Hall, the RSL, the RFS, and the Co-op. So we're working with each of those committees to install a solar system with an ample battery to ensure that they've got energy security in the event of the grid going down. Luke mentioned the website where you can find a lot of information. We do work on energy resilience. We have run a couple of webinars about how people can retrofit their homes for better energy efficiency, or how they might build new homes if you're recovering after a bushfire loss, and build an energy efficient house. So we can help you with providing you with links and information about those sorts of energy issues as well. And we're really working hard on community engagement. One of the elements of the funding that we received from the Commonwealth is to fund a position for a community engagement energy coordinator, who will be there to talk broadly across a whole range of energy resilience and energy security issues and emissions issues, because of course this is going to save emissions and help in the greenhouse climate change challenges. And it's very exciting. So I will pass back to Luke now.
Thank you, Zena. That's great. I'd like to now introduce very quickly our wonderful community members today who are going to share their personal experiences. And first of all, Jan Rivers, if you can go for it, Jan. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. We all have very different reasons for supporting the microgrid in our town. My husband and I made the decision to leave Cobargo because there was no power, no water, and the air was so polluted. For my husband, he had not been able to sleep for about 3 nights because he was desperate for sleep. because he needs a machine to breathe at night, and also his lungs could not cope with the ash in the air. We drove to Canberra, but kept in touch every single day with our fantastic neighbour to get an update on the situation. And every day it was no, no, do not come back yet. So after almost 2 weeks, we finally returned. We love our home in Cobargo, and we are so glad we moved here over 10 years ago. And we don't ever want to be in that situation again. And I know that we were some of the lucky ones. Everyone's got a story, and we were so lucky. So this is why I know that the microgrid is important for our community, for resilience, and the 4 refuges, the RSL, the RFS, the School of Arts and the Co-op, will be somewhere safe for us to go. Somewhere safe, somewhere cool, and somewhere with power. Thank you. Over to you, Luke.
Excellent. Thanks, Jan. We're now going to ask Scott Herring, who's going to share with us his personal experiences during and post the fires. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, hi everyone. So directly in terms of energy loss, I think it was a really critical factor for the experience that we had on the day of the fire. So personally, I was, involved in trying to defend my property, and the first thing I lost was with the power, of course, was the power to pump any water out of the tank with the electric. And unfortunately, I wasn't one of those people who was prepared enough to have a backup petrol pump at that time. So I lost the ability to actively pump out of my water tanks, which was a big deal, one that definitely wouldn't be a mistake I'd make again. In addition to that, on the actual day, I think we had a lot of problems with communication in terms of as soon as you lost the internet, there was an avenue of communication and information that was lost. Phones were lost for a number of different reasons, including your landline when your base station didn't have any power anymore. So mobiles were one thing, and the towers and everything, but I think it affected communications pretty seriously, even down to radio. So on the actual day, it was also, not only affected your ability to communicate and to potentially defend your home, but when you drove out and you figured you needed more petrol for your ute or more petrol for your pump or whatever, you couldn't get it because the pumps at the servo were down, and there was nothing they could do about it. So you couldn't get petrol to keep going, and you needed to keep going. And that was something like the next phase, the days after, the days following, I think, the fuel issue was big. The people were scrounging for fuel. I made trips down to Merimbula and filled up any sort of container I could find to bring back and give to people that needed it. But people were running out of fuel in terms of being able to think about further evacuation or wherever. They were limited in where they could go because they couldn't access fuel. So that was a critical one for me. Another one was that none of the shops could operate any electronic payments. And if you didn't have cash, you had nothing to trade with. So, the lack of being able to purchase goods and services was pretty serious in the local area for a few days. And then just the basics of power. And I remember when we were down at the relief centre or the refuge down there at the Oval, people bringing in all the contents of their freezers and fridges that were just starting to go off, and please use this food. And that's a very short-term thing. When the food's going off, that's good for a couple of days. It's a feast. But then after that, if you're in trouble for any longer and you don't have refrigeration, then you soon realise that that's a pretty critical problem. That goes through to, I think there's a couple of other key things, I think, that, that the communication, the lack of communication certainly led to a feeling of isolation, and that increased the trauma for a few people, especially out in the more remote areas, I guess, where they didn't have internet or communication. But in town as well. And even in town, you couldn't go and get help from people who had a house to charge a phone or whatever. So especially critical for the fire, for the refuge centre to have that independent power supply. And I guess that's already being addressed, which is so critical and so good that we're onto that already, I think. The big thing, another big thing came in terms of, the days following your cleanup effort, and then the weeks following. But while you had no power, you were really limited in the tools that you could use to achieve cleanup of the getting stuck into the debris or cleaning things you needed or whatever, because you needed power tools, pressure cleaners and power drills and saws and all sorts of stuff. You couldn't use them if you didn't have a generator, and there weren't that many generators around, and people were scrounging and borrowing and all sorts of stuff. So that definitely set people back. And then, of course, and this is, I know I'm getting close to my time, as you're going on longer term, that inability or the need to adapt from a stable electrical supply really highlighted the vulnerability that you have, you know, on the individual properties. I live right on the edge of Cobargo. I had mains power, but it still pointed out to me that without power, you've got a whole bunch of problems you've never thought about before. Everything from laundry to lights to heating, cooling, fans, and all of which you take for granted until it goes away, and it makes a big difference in your life. So I really felt for people long term who continue to deal with those problems, couldn't do laundry unless they came, you know, into an area until power was restored, things like that. It was a real eye opener for me, and one that I hope I don't have to get, a situation I don't have to get caught in again. Thanks, Scott. That was fantastic, and yeah, thanks again, Jan and Scott, for sharing something which wouldn't have been easy to go through, and as Jan said, everyone's got a story and an experience that they went through during Black Summer. And the exciting thing about this project is that we've received funding as part of the recovery, and to provide us with not only resilience, but energy security. So that's something that's really important going forward with so many natural disasters as we continue to observe around us. So I'm now going to hand over to the ITP team, who are going to outline the more technical aspects of the project and provide an outline of that work that's going to be carried out. So thank you, ITP.
Thanks, Luke, for that. Can everybody hear me? Wonderful, thanks. So hi, everyone. I'm Clara Wilson, and I'm a community consultant with ITP Renewables. On behalf of the ITP team, it's a real pleasure to be here today, and we'd like to thank Cadet for organising today's meeting, and to all of you for attending and giving up time on your weekend. Today, I will provide an intro to the company and who we are, and provide a bit of background into the microgrid project. I'll then hand over to Susan from our engineering team to talk a bit more about the microgrid feasibility study, and then Rob Passy will talk to the load management trial. So ITP is a renewable energy consultancy based in Canberra and operating across Australia and the Pacific. We're part of the global ITP Energised Group, which was founded in the UK in 1981, and we've been operating in Australia since 2003. With me today, I'm very pleased to have Ol Waldring, who's the head of our strategy and policy team, Rob Passy, who's a senior consultant in that team, Susan Dedman from our engineering team, and unfortunately, I think Muriel Watt, who's one of our advisors, has had some internet issues today and can't be with us, but I'm sure you'll be seeing her down the track at other meetings. We'll also have other members of the team that will be involved in this project at various stages, for example, with design or grid connection studies. So you'll see some new faces as we progress. So our expertise covers both grid-connected and off-grid renewable generation and storage systems. And we've actually been recently working on a few microgrid feasibility studies. One really interesting one is the Yarrabah microgrid feasibility study, which is located in an Indigenous community near Cairns in far north Queensland. And that community has really been looking to find ways to improve their energy security. That study was recently completed, and there'll soon be some more information that's publicly available about that. We've also been working on another microgrid study for the Napranum and Murralag microgrids, and have worked on a few other hybrid projects. So I won't talk through all of these in the presentation today, but if you'd like to learn more, please feel free to jump on our website, or we're happy to talk more to these projects during question time. We've also worked on some interesting mini-grid projects, and the main difference between a mini-grid and a microgrid is that a mini-grid is a standalone system that's not grid connected, whereas a microgrid can be grid connected, but then can also be disconnected from the main grid. So on this project, we worked with Tokelau to become the first country in the world to be fully solar powered through the installation of 3 island scale solar PV and battery systems. We're also now working with them on another stage of work, which will be increasing the size of the solar systems and also doing an upgrade for the battery systems. So that's a bit about us. I'll now give a bit of background to how we've got to where we are today. So we've heard some really personal and moving stories from Jan and Scott. So thank you so much to both of you for sharing those stories today. This slide gives a bit of a technical perspective on what happened during the power outages. So you can see in the graph below just how long those outages occurred for with zero generation. And from a technical perspective, the main reason for that is that Cobargo is supplied by a 33 kV feeder from Bega, which you can probably very faintly see in the map on the right, in the top right-hand corner in green. And this means that the feeder is really susceptible to anything that happens upstream in the network. So if that supply is affected, Cobargo can experience a loss of power. And the rationale for looking into the feasibility of a microgrid is to allow a portion of Cobargo to stay powered during an outage using local generation, such as solar and batteries. Cadet has been really proactive following the bushfires in looking at different ways to improve energy security for the community. And we've worked with Cadet to apply for 3 grants. The first of these was a grant from the New South Wales government for community surveys of the impacts of the power outages and responses to solve that issue in the future. So thank you to anyone who participated in that survey. That information really paved the way for the further grants that we've received. And then the second grant, which is the subject of the microgrid feasibility study and the load control trial, is a federal government grant. We also applied for a 3rd federal government grant, which is to provide energy information services and emergency power systems for some essential loads. This slide gives a bit of an overview of the scope of work for the second grant, which is one of the federal government grants. And that main scope is firstly the microgrid feasibility study. So looking into a design for that microgrid and progressing that to the stage where it can be constructed. And then also the load management trial that Rob will talk to a bit later in the presentation. This is a 3-year project with a total budget of 1.475 million. And you can see from the breakdown in this slide that a lot of that will go to external providers, including Essential Energy for grid connection fees and studies, consultants providing the development application studies. And for the load management trial, a lot of that funding will go to the companies that provide the devices themselves. Some of our main stakeholders and partners in this project are obviously Cadet and the Cobargo community that will work through all the way through this project in selecting a site for the proposed microgrid and working with you on the load management trial. Also working with the Bega Valley Shire Council, who would be the planning body for the microgrid, Essential Energy on the grid connection side, and then the federal government, who is the funding body for this project. This slide provides an indicative timeframe. So as I mentioned, it's a 3-year project wrapping up in April of 2024. you can see that the main area that we've started working on is the technical feasibility for the microgrid. So we've been gathering data from Essential Energy and the community about this part of the network and what some of the key loads are. And then soon we'll be kicking off the load management trial, and then also working with the community to determine some sites for the microgrid, and then starting to prepare the studies for the development application and working through the grid connection process with Essential Energy. And lastly, I've spoken mostly about how this project would benefit Cobargo specifically and the benefits for energy security. But we also hope that this project could be a case study for other Australian communities looking to do a similar thing and shore up their energy supply for the future. And that would be through determining what kinds of skills and processes are needed for developing a microgrid. The information that comes out of the load management trial will be really key in optimising the sizing of the microgrid. And also, as we progress, looking at approaches to the ownership and management of that project. I'll now hand over to Susan, who will talk to the microgrid in a bit more detail.
Thanks very much, Clara. Can everyone hear me? Yep, great. Okay. I'd just like to echo Clara, first of all, by saying ITP, we're really proud to be partnering with Cadet and working with you, the community, on this project. And I'm personally really looking forward to it as well. Fantastic project, which should result in some great outcomes. So just firstly, I'll be talking about the microgrid part of it. Just check that I've got slide control mapped.
Yeah, for some reason it's not letting me let you do it. Yeah. If it doesn't work, just shout out to me when you want the slide change and I'll do it.
It did just change, so maybe there's a bit of a lag. That's all right. So we've been talking a lot about a microgrid. So what is a microgrid actually? And it sounds like quite a technical term. So a microgrid is a small localized power grid that can operate independently, but may still be connected back to and even feed back into the main electrical supply. So in this graphic, that circle there represents the microgrid. A microgrid consists of a number of loads, which is anything that consumes electricity, such as, the houses and businesses within Cobargo, even electric vehicles. It also consists of local generation. So this might include distributed generation, such as residential rooftop solar, and usually some kind of centralized generation as well, such as a larger solar array, a shared battery, and often also diesel generators. This is all brought together by an overarching microgrid control system, which is responsible for monitoring the load and managing the generation. So this system as a whole can either be connected to the main utility network, which would be represented by that, switch icon on the left there being connected. And during this time, electricity can flow from the electricity network into the microgrid system. It could also flow from the microgrid out into the main network as well. On the other hand, if that connection to the main network is disconnected for any reason, the microgrid is also able to operate as an independent contained system. Change slide. Okay. So what could a microgrid look like at Cobargo, and how would that operate in the case of an outage? We'll step through how that could look in terms of the different phases here. So what we've got shown in this diagram is basically the current configuration. We've got the utility network, which is providing, your normal electricity supply. And that feeds electricity into the Cobargo electricity network, where we've got, for example, our essential community loads, things like the co-op, police building, service station, water services, that kind of thing. We've also got our residential loads, which can be made up of things that are controllable to some extent with devices, which Rob will talk more about. So things like pool pumps or hot water systems, that kind of thing. And a lot of these systems, or some of these systems, might also have their own generation, their own residential solar PV on the roof as well. So this is the current situation where, situation normal, we've got electricity coming from the utility network and feeding those loads in the community. They're also partly powered by some local generation as well. So what happens now if we add some centralized solar generation, such as a large solar array and shared battery? During grid connected operation, that can feed electricity into the local network, where it will feed the loads. And if there's more power generated than that, that can even export back out into the main grid. If there's not enough power generated from that, you'll still just continue to get your electricity from the utility network as per normal. So this really doesn't result in any change in terms of how you access electricity from your premises. Now let's say that there is an outage on the main network. So you can see that the utility network is greyed out there. It's no longer providing power to the Cobargo electricity network. At this point, the loads within Cobargo are being powered purely by the local generation. That is that shared solar and battery, as well as any distributed generation such as solar PV. The next step that could happen is that load management devices could be used to reduce some of those loads within houses and businesses that are not deemed as critical. So things like pool pumps, solar hot water heaters, that kind of thing. And basically what that does is that reduces the overall load on the system. As we go further down the timeline, what we might do then as a next step is turn off those loads completely. So still having those main residential loads and businesses connected, but now without some of those appliances which are less critical. And finally, at this point, you might be well past the point where the electricity network has first disconnected. As a last point, only the critical community loads would remain connected. And the idea being that these would be connected for the longest period of time possible. So things like, the service station and community spaces to provide cool areas for people, things like that are really considered critical by the community, they would be kept powered for the longest period of time. The important thing to note is that the vast majority of the time, Cobargo would be grid connected and operating usually, with the only difference being that there is now a central solar and battery system, which is providing some local renewable energy generation. In terms of the Cobargo community's access to electricity, the difference occurs during an outage on the main network, at which point the microgrid is operating to keep critical community loads powered for longer. Okay, so this actually comes up a bit small, I think, but essentially this slide shows the location of some of these key community services that the microgrid would hopefully be able to keep powered. The red line shows a single electrical feeder and its location within the Cobargo town. And the good news is that, as a very preliminary look, it looks like a lot of these services are located on the main street and on the one feeder, which will simplify keeping a number of them powered. So part of this project will be working with the community to look at what the microgrid can keep powered and for how long. The microgrid really has a number of different benefits for the community. So we've talked a lot about the main aim being to improve Cobargo's energy resilience, energy security, and allowing those critical businesses and services to stay powered for longer in any situation where the main electricity network is affected and no longer providing power to the town. So obviously, Cobargo has experienced the worst of that in, a natural disaster such as the bushfires, where they're really unavailable for an extended period of time. But of course, this microgrid could also help in those shorter outages, such as a few hours or a day or so as well. Another thing that we will be investigating as part of this project is the options for community ownership of the system, and hopefully providing Cobargo with the opportunity to own some of its own local power generation. And lastly, that generation will be moving the Bega Valley Shire towards meeting its renewable energy targets as well. So one of the first things we'll start looking at for the microgrid is how much generation makes sense for this microgrid. So how much solar, PV and battery storage. As part of that, we'll be looking at how much electricity Cobargo's homes and businesses consume. And we might be asking you for some help with this, particularly around those critical loads, some bills. They can really help us get an idea of just how much electricity is being used. And we'll also need to look at how much energy a solar array can produce in this location in Cobargo, taking into account things like bushfire smoke, which, you know, obviously aren't really a usual situation and will reduce the irradiance on the array. The other thing which we'll start working on with the community is looking for a suitable site for that centralised solar and storage. There's a lot of things which need to be considered when searching for a site, and the design of the microgrid really depends a lot on the site that is chosen. So for example, on the right here, we've got some pictures of different different mounting technologies for solar. And, you know, things like this can depend a lot on the site that is available. Just change that. Yeah, okay, there we go. Some of the things that we consider when looking for a site is things like, you know, how close is it to the electricity network? What's the topography of the site? Is it flat or hilly? If it's sloped, which way is it sloping? How much area is available, and is the site easily accessible? And of course, you know, what impact will a solar farm development on a certain site have on the surrounding region? And what are the community's preferences? We're really interested in all options in the close Cobargo surrounds. So on our end, we'll be, you know, kind of trying to look out for options that look like they might be feasible from a technical perspective and talking to the community about those. And we'd also really love to hear from you, from the community, if you have any ideas as well, or know of any options that might be suitable. Okay, so that's it from me on the microgrid section. I'll now pass over to Rob to talk about the load management trial.
Thanks very much, Susan. Hi, everyone. I'll just, okay. So today I'll just be quickly, so as well as work at ITP, I also work at University of New South Wales, and I'm also involved with a community group called Community Owned Renewable Energy Mullumbimby. And we go around sticking solar panels on community halls that they pay off over time. So I'm sort of familiar with how community groups work. Today, I'll be talking about the load management trial. And I'll just quickly go over these seven different topics. First of all, I'll quickly describe what it is, then why we're doing it, how we're actually managing the loads, what devices we're using, is there anything you need to do during the trial, what happens at the end of the trial, and what you do if you want to be involved in the trial. Okay, so what is it? First of all, it's entirely voluntary, so we need your help if people are interested in participating in this trial, and obviously participation is free. And the idea is that about 10 times, it might be 5 to 10 times roughly, during the year, key appliances will be turned down, turned up, or turned off. The types of appliances we're looking at are things like water heaters, refrigerators, air conditioners, batteries, and pool pumps, because they tend to use the most electricity in the average home. Batteries are also useful because you can turn them up and down. And so we're looking for households and businesses in the Cobargo village can volunteer to participate. We're hoping for about 30 participants, so about 15 households and 15 businesses. The trial lasts for 1 year, but as I said above, it only happens very infrequently during that year. And probably most likely during summer, because that's when you're most likely to get a bushfire. But we also would like to do some testing during winter as well. And that's because there's much less sunshine during winter. And so there's much less power coming out of these solar panels. We hope to start installing devices in April to May, with the trial starting around June, July this year. Okay, so why are we doing it? As Susan mentioned, the microgrid that we're providing the feasibility study for has to be sized to meet the maximum load. Now, if you look at the diagram on the right-hand side here, that describes an average load profile for an average house. So across the bottom, you've got the time of day. So it starts at midnight, goes to midday in the middle of the day, and then midnight at the end of the day. And on the left-hand side, you've got the electricity usage. So you can see overnight, when there's no sun, you have a fairly low level of load. And then in the morning, when everyone gets up and turns everything on, then you have your a bit of a peak in electricity use. It goes down again in the middle of the day, and then it peaks in the evening. That's when you get the highest peak. And the idea is that the microgrid and also the national electricity market, the entire electricity supply needs to be built to meet those demand peaks. So if you can reduce those peaks in demand, then that reduces the size of the system you need to build. So on the second point there, the load is both the power needed at any one time, so that's in the evening, but also the amount of electricity needed over time, and that's especially critical overnight if you're using a solar, centralized solar generator to produce your electricity. And a few times during the year, especially during summer, they can be quite large. And the idea is we use load management to reduce demand during those times, and so reduce the size and the cost of the microgrid. Okay, so this next one is how are we managing the loads? So we'll contact you 48 hours before each load management event to let you know it's about to happen. And you can opt out. It says there up to 6 hours before the trial, but really if you contact us even an hour before the trial, we can still take you off the trial. So you'll have plenty of notice that the trial is about to happen. Then we manage loads using commercially available devices. They either attach to your meter box, your electricity meter box, or possibly directly to your water heater or your air conditioner, depending on the type of device. And if you just look at the image on the right-hand side there, that's basically the same load profile. But you can see these arrows, and the red on the left-hand side there, an arrow pointing down about 3:30 in the morning. That's where we've reduced the amount of electricity used to heat your water. And so that reduces the amount of electricity that has to be provided by a battery overnight. And then in the middle of the day, we actually shift that water. We shift that water to the middle of the day. And so we can soak up some of the solar generation that's being used there. So we use that directly. And then in the evening, when you have that big peak, that's often caused by things like air conditioning loads in summer. And so we can remotely control your air conditioner, not necessarily turning it off, but just turning it down. It might be down. It might sometimes, depending on the device that you install, you can turn it down by say 2 degrees, or you might actually just reduce it by 25% or 50%, that sort of thing. And also pool pumps, a good one to turn down overnight. And those devices will be controlled from a central point in Cobargo. So the idea is that whoever's actually running the centralized solar generation system can also control the load. So if they can see that there's going to be, there won't be enough power generated to maintain the microgrid, they will have the option to actually turn down those loads from a centralized point. So what device are we using? So we're currently looking at 3 different devices. There's one's called G-Switch, one's called Watt Watches, and one's called Carbon Track. Some of you might be familiar with those. Some of you might have heard of Solar Analytics. They actually use a Watt Watches device. And we've chosen those particular devices. I mean, you can get simpler devices that you can use to control loads, but we've chosen these devices because they also provide an interface where you can monitor your electricity use and you can manage your loads to reduce your electricity bills. These devices normally cost about $1,000 installed. So whoever participates in the trial will get these devices for free, and you get to use them for a year. And you can see the images on the right are sort of screenshots from either a computer screen. The top one's from a computer screen, and the bottom right one is from a mobile phone. So it shows you the sort of information that you can get from these devices. Okay, is there anything you need to do during the trial? So during the trial period, which is a year, apart from receiving the notifications about the load control events, we hope you really won't even notice it's happening. That's sort of the idea. But we do want you to complete a really short survey so that we can get some sort of feedback on what you thought of the trial. Did you receive the communications in time? Did you notice the impact of the trial or the load management, etc., that sort of thing? And then at the end of the trial, either we remove the device for free, or we're hoping you can keep the device. We've still got to hear from the funding body whether you can actually do this or not. We hope you can, because otherwise they'll probably be thrown away. But if you do keep them, there will be an annual fee. You don't pay that to us. You pay that to the people that provide the devices, and that's to cover their cost of monitoring, or the monitoring cost for your devices and software. Okay, and if you do want to be involved in the trial, there's the website. So you can, that's the Renewable Cobargo website. And there's a short questionnaire. And if you can complete that questionnaire, it's really just an expression of interest. You're certainly not committing to anything. We just want to get some sort of flavour for who wants to be involved. And there's no obligation to participate. So after you've filled out that form, which includes questions like what sort of devices would you like, what sort of appliances would you like controlled, then we'll get back to you. And at any stage, you can decide that you don't want to be involved. And I think that's it from me. And I hand over to Luke, I believe.
While we're waiting for Luke here, I'll just jump in quickly and say this page isn't quite up on the website yet. Probably about an hour after this meeting, it'll go live, and there will be an information page and a form that you can submit if you want more information or if you want to sign up for this expression of interest that Rob just talked about. So that'll be probably about an hour after the meeting finishes.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I've found the unmute button. And I'm about to have a look at so whilst we've been talking, people have been busily, and from what I can see on my screen, entering in their questions for the Q&A session. So we're now about to enter into that session, and basically how that's going to work is I'm going to be going through this wonderful list that Alex, Matt's partner, has been putting together for us. And we're just going to work systematically through those. So, and I'm going to mention just by first name the people who've posed these questions, just so that you know that your particular issue is being addressed. So first of all, I've got a question here for ITP. So if you guys can turn your thinking caps on. This one's from Harry. When can we expect the microgrid actually to be operational? Someone from ITP like to take that one? If you can unmute.
I'll have a go. Oliver Waldring here. Thanks for the question, Harry. I was just in the middle of typing an answer, but in short, bear in mind this process is to develop the feasibility study. It will result in a high level of technical detail. So at the end of this process, one would hope that we would be ready to go to, a tender process. But it's likely to be the case, I think, that the next step, the construction step, will probably benefit from a second round of grant from probably the federal government. And there is such a round at the moment, actually. It's funded by the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. This grant round will last for several years. You can Google it. It's called the Regional Australia Microgrid Pilots Program. So in essence, this process is the feasibility study. The construction will be a second step, but there is likely to be a range of funding sources available for that.
Excellent. Thank you, Oliver. I think in summary, this whole process is not going to be a sprint. I think we probably should be more realistically thinking of it as a marathon. And that's not to delay or dampen enthusiasm, but I think realistically, there are a number of processes that have to be gone through. So like anything that's a fairly significant change to the way we do things, and where government must be involved.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Luke. And just to add to that, there's a lot of things that are involved in this project that are being done for the first time, particularly from the point of view of the distributor, Essential Energy. So a large part of this project will be essentially sitting with Essential as they think through the complicated process of how they deal with, especially with the regulatory environment, and how they deal with this sort of microgrid that is embedded in a network. This is a really quite a unique process, and that's the main reason this takes a long time is because Essential Energy really need to think carefully about how they're going to manage it.
I might just, oh, sorry, Zenny, you go.
Yeah, can I just jump in here? Harry, yeah, you come back and I can see you saying, why not say how long it will take? It's going to take as long as it's going to take, and that could be 3 years. I don't know. There's an awful lot, as Oliver has said, that needs to be sorted here. And one of the reasons that Cobargo was chosen to receive this Commonwealth funding, which is not bushfire funding, this is actually trying to tease out what these issues are for small communities like us at the end of the line. What are the difficulties, particularly in New South Wales, of building these sorts of microgrids? So we're breaking new ground here. And Cobargo was selected from an incredibly intense field of other applicants from across Australia to answer a whole bunch of questions that need to be answered if rural and regional communities are going to be able to benefit from the transition to renewables. I would love to say that it's going to be built in 3 years' time, but the regulatory framework at the moment is such that there is an awful lot of regulatory change, legislative change. We have the technology to do this, by and large. I think that's fair to say, ITP, but the regulatory framework is not ready for this. So we really are pushing the envelope here. And what we do here is going to benefit rural and regional communities, not just in New South Wales, but across Australia.
Yeah, no, thanks, Zena, and everyone else for chipping in. We'll keep things moving. So, and also please continue to add new questions in. So Kim has a question now. This one is the microgrid going to use the standard poles and wires?
I can jump in on this one. Generally, we try to do that as much as possible, mainly because that kind of electricity infrastructure is very expensive. And so if we're able to use existing assets as much as possible, that's definitely the preference. We, as part of this study, will be undertaking detailed network modelling with Essential Energy to see if basically the existing network can cope with, you know, what we would like to put in. And sometimes augmentation or upgrade is required, and we then work with Essential on that. The other part that may need to be constructed is from wherever the site is, basically some small amount of poles and wires just to connect it back onto the feeder. But generally, you know, we try to minimise putting in new infrastructure because it is quite costly. Thanks,
Susan. I think that's a pretty good answer. I think we've probably covered that one. Now from Fiona, with another question for ITP. During the fires, the smoke prevented generation of solar power for an extended period. Can we attach a generator to the microgrid during this period if it should happen again?
Yeah, I can jump in again. Anyone else, feel free to, I don't want to be hogging the microphone, but yes, absolutely, we can. And I think that's definitely a very good consideration, given the smoke, and something that we will be looking into. I believe that one of the outcomes of the earlier community surveys was a preference to minimise that diesel generation. But yes, it's certainly something that we'll be considering.
I just, Rob here, just following up on that. We did some, in the modelling, we assumed a certain amount of reduction in solar power simply because of smoke. And we've managed to get load profiles from household PV systems that were operating during the bushfires. So we have a fairly good idea of how much their generation was reduced. And we include those in the modelling. And the idea is you have the batteries as well. So they've got a very large battery, which not only goes overnight, but will hopefully allow you to go for a few days as well, if the loads are reduced. And then, of course, Susan was saying you also have the diesel generator as backup, as a sort of a very last, you know, last choice emergency backup.
Thanks, Rob. All right, moving on. Another one for ITP. You guys are just really scoring well here, but you're doing well so far. This one's from Harry. Could be a different Harry, might be the same. How much will Essential Energy be paying for energy that's exported to the grid?
I can answer this one if you want. So if you're talking about electricity that's coming directly from the large-scale solar battery sort of thing, so Essential Energy don't pay any money for that. That large-scale battery will probably operate in what's called the wholesale spot market. And so they actually just sell that electricity that straight into the spot market. And they might, I mean, there's a number of different ways of doing that. They could also just sell it to a local retailer who then buys that through what's called a power purchase agreement and then sells that to the local people. And that also raises the issue of who actually owns the generator. If it's partly community owned, then selling that electricity into the wholesale spot market can generate income for the community, etc. So that's how it might work.
Okay, so that's more of an issue down the track. Would that be right in saying, Rob? So if we get the green light to go ahead, then the issue of actual retailing or where money gets involved, that's another issue that's a separate one to deal with, I guess.
That's right. Once it's actually being built, then you'll have the people putting up the money will also put up business models for how that could operate, which hopefully will include the community. And you'll need to have some sort of, there's two options. Either you can sell money straight into the spot market where you just get whatever price available, or you sell it through the power purchase agreement to a retailer. But that's a decision once it's been built.
Yep, well, that'll be a good problem to have, I think.
Yes.
Getting that far. Rightio. Again, this one is actually for Cadet, which is great news. So we can bring in our local gurus. This one's from Ruta. Now, it says here, we have a dispersed population around Cobargo. Will there be opportunities for everyone to be part of the microgrid? So, Cadet people.
I can jump in here, maybe. This is also partly a question for ITP because it is kind of technical in nature. It really, as Susan was saying, it really depends on what the existing poles and wires look like. But kind of, ideally, we would cover everything, obviously, but you're kind of limited by the existing poles and wires and what can be energized. It's not feasible necessarily to completely build out a whole new system of distribution. So we're kind of limited in that sense. I think we'll be looking at including the largest area that we can, but we're still figuring out what that could look like at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, you go, Rob.
I was just going to say, there's when you're building these sorts of things and connecting to the network, once you go over what's called 5 megawatts, which is pretty big, then your costs increase astronomically. And so the idea is you want to keep it below that. And that will include not just the solar farm, but also the battery capacity. So even if you might be using the solar farm to charge the battery, so the battery's not discharging, so it's not acting as a generator, you have to add them up to get within that 5 megawatt limit. And that limits the size of the system you can produce. It limits the size of the solar system you can use, which then limits the amount of electricity you produce, which limits the amount of the size of Cobargo that can be covered. If you're in outlying areas of Cobargo, then the idea, I think, would be to have more of what's called a standalone power system where you just have your own solar and battery, that sort of thing. But we will, as Susan said, try and cover as much of Cobargo as we can within that 5 megawatt limit.
Yeah, and just to jump off the back of that, there's a lot of options for that, and we would like to try to keep as much powered as possible, noting of course as well that what is kind of the most important to keep powered for the longest is those really critical community loads. So we would look at doing something like that staged approach if we can, where maybe in the very first parts of the outage or kind of immediately after outage, we are able to keep a larger area powered for a shorter amount of time, and then that gradually gets reduced as time goes on and there's still no electricity available.
Yeah, I guess it's possibly true to say that a feasibility study is just that. You know, that a lot of these questions are actually going to be explored as part of the study itself. So you know, any answers now are kind of just the foretaste of what really needs to be studied in more detail in the feasibility side of things.
Luke, can I just jump
in?
Yeah,
jump in, Zena.
Yeah, there's been a few questions about governance and ownership in the Q&A as I've been looking. And these are questions that will be explored as part of the feasibility study. We're looking at different models of ownership. Our preference is that this be a community-owned asset, and that if there is any revenue to be generated from this, which we hope there will be, that it becomes available for the use of the Cobargo community. But we're also realistic, and we understand that this is a big project that will require a high level of funding, so it's unlikely that the community will be able to fund it entirely itself. There are discussions that have been going on, not just our discussions, but with big institutional investors about how these community projects can be perhaps jointly funded in public-private partnerships. There's a lot of discussion going on at the moment about what the return on investment should be to those people who are putting large amounts of financial resources into this. So is a financial return on investment the only thing that these institutional investors will be looking at, or can we persuade them that there are social and other returns in terms of resilience in the community and community stability, community health and well-being, that we might be able to design in a way that can appeal to a corporate investor? All of this is part of the feasibility. All of this needs input from the community. And if you do have any ideas, or if you'd like to be indeed part of the team that's looking at these governance and financial structuring issues, do let us know. We have a conversation that's going on at the moment with the NAB Foundation. And we've had a conversation with some of the insurance groups, because all of this will help improve the resilience of our community against future disasters. But at the moment, we're still at the exploratory stage. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Zena. I guess in a similar vein, but yeah, slightly different tack. We've got a question here from Carolyn. And a similar, I think, query shared with Harry is, once a suitable site has been found for the microgrid farm, quote unquote, who will own the land, the site, and who will maintain it? So, Cadet, any comment there, Matt, for example, or ITP?
I think I covered that in my response, Luke. So,
okay, yeah.
This is an issue that we will be exploring through the feasibility study, and they're great questions, and they're for the community. And we have to get it right so that the community is going to be a direct beneficiary of this this project. But you know, it's part of the study.
Okay, no worries. Fine, and also, you know, we're doing our best to address the questions we have today. Again, just really encourage people, if you know, if the answers aren't, and they can't be comprehensive, really, to be honest, in the time we have, visit the website, send emails, make comments, and or contact you know, the committee directly, as if you know some of the people here today. And yeah, just look, this is the first of many interactions and consultations. That's probably important to emphasize today. So the questions will only increase, I'd say, as we go down, but over time the answers will start to roll out as well. Okay, how are we going for time? Yep, we're doing all right. Next question is from Andrew. Can Bermagui be involved in the microgrid? Are we on the same Bega feeder line? So that might be an ITP question, possibly.
I can answer that. Bermagui, so I suppose it's building on responses to the earlier questions about how much can be included in the microgrid. So Bermagui would be outside the area of this particular microgrid, partly because you'd need a very large generator to power all of Cobargo and Bermagui. You're right, it is on the same line. And so that'd be a very large generator, but also it's possible that that line would be burnt in a bushfire anyway. And so it would, ideally Bermagui and each town, Corma, places like that would have their own microgrid that they could use to power their own essential services.
Okay, so might be true to say that the learnings from Cobargo would be very invaluable to the people of Bermagui.
That's right.
Excellent. All right. We've also got one here from Andrew and Kath, which is, will household batteries be taken into account in the system? That's the first part of it.
Yep, I can answer that one. So there's sort of two parts to that question. Is that, sorry, my phone's going. There's two parts to that question. One is that, sure, if you've got a battery and a solar system as well operating within the microgrid, then it will contribute to how that microgrid operates, in that it will just contribute electricity that's being used locally. Separate to that is the load management trial, where if you have a battery that can be controlled centrally, then we can use that battery at times of the day which would benefit the microgrid, but that wouldn't necessarily be the same times of day that would benefit the owner of the battery. So people that have their own behind the meter batteries may not want to have that like independently controlled as part of the load management. But even if they're not independently controlled, they're still contributing simply by helping to meet that person's load.
Excellent. Now, part B of 3 parts. Can the microgrid be adaptive or adapted to work with existing solar and battery systems that are already grid connected? So sort of the same question.
Yes.
Slightly.
Yes.
I think we've covered it.
Yep.
Part B. Part C, what will this mean for local power generators, i.e. those with solar arrays? Do they become retailers within the local electricity network?
During, so 99.9% of the time, I mean, ideally 100% of the time, all of the microgrid won't actually operate as a microgrid. It will always be, you'll just be connected to the main network all the time, so nothing will change. When it's in a microgrid situation, that's one of the regulatory issues that Oliver was talking about before, because you're no longer part of what's called the national electricity market, so that all the rules suddenly change. And so that's one of the things that we are trying to work out. Ideally, what would happen is you would still get paid for feeding electricity into the grid. You would still get paid the normal rate you get paid by your retailer. So we're trying to make, from the customer's point of view, nothing changes, just to keep it as simple as possible.
Very good. Okay. So now some ones which anyone on the panel today can jump in on. So from Ruta, how will the microgrid cope with future increases in local electricity demand as a result of our shift away from fossil fuel energy sources, e.g. gas to electricity, electric vehicles, etc.?
I can jump in on this one. So we will be considering, I guess, load growth as part of what we're looking at when we consider, you know, the data to us for how much generation we need. So we've actually got some data already kind of, you know, from the last 10 years in terms of how much electricity has been consumed, and we can see some growth there. So we can kind of make some projections into how much it will increase in the future as well. The other thing is that, of course, you know, these systems, even once constructed, can also be, you know, added to in the future as well, like what we talked about with our Tokelau project from the past. So you're not locked into anything and can't change it. You can definitely kind of make adjustments to the design as things change.
Beautiful.
I might just jump in here too, Lou. Just to say that this becomes even more important as we move towards further electrification. As more and more appliances and vehicles and things move to electric powered, we need a reliable grid more than ever. There's no backup anymore. So projects like this, hopefully distributed around the grid, will just increase the reliability for everyone, which is going to be needed.
Excellent. All righty. So question now from Alan. How will the microgrid benefit Cobargo during normal times when there isn't a power shutdown? Anybody?
I'll jump in here quickly until someone else comes up with a better answer.
My connection went down for a second. You go, Matt. That's fine.
Yeah, so basically we've got a large solar array and a battery, which, like Rob said before, will be just feeding into the normal electricity grid. So it will be generating income as it's feeding into the grid. The battery will be doing the same thing. It will be buying when cheap and selling when expensive to make money. The question then, like Zena was saying, is does the community own any of this? So ideally, there would be some community ownership, which means that some of that money made from the system would feed back into the local community. From the other side, it just means that we will be generating a bunch of renewable energy locally, which means that the energy that people in Cobargo are using will automatically become more renewable, which is a good thing. Not tangible necessarily, but a good thing.
Are you right, Rob, or did you want to add to that? Or?
And that, obviously the benefits, financial benefits that come to Cobargo depend on the ownership model. And these systems are very expensive. They're millions of dollars to build. So that's not the poles and wires because they're already there. That's just the large scale solar and the battery, and that's sort of all the controls that are put in. They're quite expensive. So we're hoping, you could look as an example, community solar farm that ITP is also involved in. And you can invest in that solar farm. You get, that's open obviously to the local people first, but it's now been made broader, and you can get a very good return on investment on that, because really, although it would be nice for people just to invest because it's a good thing, some people will do that, but generally people do want some sort of return. And ideally what we'd have is as many people from the Cobargo area as possible, and Corma and Bermagiri, etc., invest in this so it is actually their farm and they will get financial benefits from it.
And I think for those who value renewable energy and its consequent reduction in carbon emissions, that's a quantifiable benefit, if you want to look at it that way as well. Rightio. So we've got, we're still going all right for time. One here from Andrew. No, I've already covered that. Got one from Inna, which is for ITP. So this is a question, a general question about renewables, in particular, solar. How do we know that the pollution created by the production of the solar arrays and batteries, mining, landfill with old arrays, etc., will not become more dangerous in the long run than that from burning coal?
I can take this one. Thanks for this question. So I think an interesting study that the International Energy Agency put out a couple of years ago is relevant here, where they looked at the emissions from coal generation versus emissions from solar and batteries. And their findings were that solar and batteries had the potential to reduce emissions more than 10 times more than coal generation. Obviously, there are still emissions with solar and batteries, and about 50% of that is from the solar production of panels, and about a quarter of that is from battery production. That study was for residential solar and PV, solar and batteries, but it's very similar technology, just on a different scale to what would be used for the microgrid. So I think that's an interesting one to take a look at. A few other things that I'd mention would be, like, maintenance is really important once a project is operating. So a well-maintained system is a much safer one. And also at the end of a project lifespan, which can be really long, renewable projects can have a design life of about 25 or even 30 years. And there's usually obligations in conditions of planning approval, connection agreements, or agreements with landholders about what has to happen at the end of that project life. So that could either be decommissioning a project where everything above the ground gets removed, or recommissioning it with new infrastructure, which means that owners can't just leave infrastructure lying around, because obviously that's not great. And lastly, that the facilities for recycling solar and batteries are getting a lot better, and it's a real focus for the industry at the moment. So one company I'm aware of is Reclaim PV, which recycles solar panels, and there's similar initiatives for batteries. And I'm sure as we look at the feasibility of this project over the next few years, there'll only be kind of more and more initiatives for recycling materials.
Excellent. Yeah.
Can I just, sorry, Luke, can I just jump on the back of that one as well?
Yeah.
Which was just to point out that for this particular project as well, where we're looking at a microgrid, it's really about that local power generation as well. So, a lot of, the utility network is coal, but for us or Cobargo to have that local power generation, that's where renewables will really offer that advantage, because, we can have that close into the town and offer that security when the main grid goes down.
Good points. Excellent. Well, we do have more questions here, but I feel that in the interests of time and keeping to our commitment to not keeping people from other things they might want to pursue on in their Saturday, we'll just all those questions, as I said, that have been typed in will have been captured, and this whole session has been recorded. Zena, you're waving your hand at me.
Yeah, I would just like to address one question that Rich put in about what sites are being assessed. At this stage, Rich, we are open to hearing from people who might have land that could be suitable for a solar array, who might be interested in hosting a solar array on their land. So if there is anybody who has an amount of land available, let us know, get in touch. We're also looking at what land is available that might be owned by council that is currently not being used, or that might be owned by the New South Wales government, which is also currently perhaps not being used, or might be suitable for a solar array. So that work is underway now. And there has been talk in Cobargo that we could be looking at the sports ground. That is potentially one site, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done before we settle on any one location. So if there are any landowners out there who've got an amount of land available, do get in touch. It'd be good to hear from you.
Yeah. No, well, I've got almost 800 square metres. No. Okay, fair enough. Got a big roof as well. But no, I think that was a fantastic Q&A session. And as I said, we'll continue, and this is the first of many consultations. And if Matt, you could bring up that final slide, that'd be great, as we cover off today. Yeah, so basically the plan from here is that we're hoping that we can hold a face-to-face community consultation meeting, and somewhere in the region of 4 to 6 weeks from now, and that date will be announced via the normal communication networks in Cobargo and Bermagui, Quama. We would like to not only have a face-to-face, but stream it over Zoom simultaneously, so that folks who are compromised health-wise or vulnerable, who are still worried about the potential of COVID infection, will be able to enjoy, and just those that can't make it physically and want to see the recorded version of that, that's what we're aiming for. And secondly, importantly for those who have a keen interest in specifically the load management trial, we're going to, we're projecting that we'll meet in late March, and that date will also be confirmed next week. So just keep that in mind, everyone, and I think yeah, just by the quality and the extent of the questions that we've received today, there's a heightened interest. I was down in the Celebrate Cobargo in the main street very recently, handing out flyers to today's meeting, and I was greeted with just a huge amount of positivity and enthusiasm from local residents. So I know there's a lot of people out there who are really excited to see this move forward, and but we're really cognizant that this project can't move forward without the full support of the community and with all the ideas and the feedback that the community can offer. So unless you've got anything more to add, Zena, I think we might wrap up today.
I'd just like to say thank you to everybody.
Yep.
I've just sent my thanks online, and as I've said, this is a really complex project. We are breaking new ground for communities all over Australia. There's a lot of questions that need to be addressed here, and it's a project that can only benefit from incredibly frank and fearless community involvement. So, you know, really welcome all your input, warts and all. And get in touch either through the website. You can give me a call if you've got my number. Yeah, we need everybody involved in this if it's going to work for the community. So thanks to everyone who came along, really appreciate it. And I hope we answered most of your questions. Those that we didn't get to, we'll either be in touch personally or we'll send you responses through the website or whatever the other way was that we discussed or that Luke's just mentioned.
Email might work.
Good. Okay.
Yep. Yep. I've got some carrier pigeons out back as well. But no, fantastic, everyone. And again, a big thanks to the ITP team. And particularly a big thanks to Matt and Alex from the cadet team, who put a lot of work into organising this activity today. So, and all the best to Dave and Deb, who are recovering from COVID. So thanks again all, and we will see you soon. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.